as I like to say, is whether you're Southern Baptist or not, you should care about what happens with the Southern Baptist Convention, because the SBC is the largest Protestant denomination in the United States of America. We have about 47,000 churches and 14 million members in the SBC. As one pastor has put it, when the SBC sneezes, America catches a cold. And so I view the Southern Baptist Convention first as a Christian as a really important avenue for spreading the gospel and evangelizing and, bringing the hope of Jesus Christ to our country, to the nation. Absolutely. But it's also a very important cultural institution in the United States, a Christian institution. And just like the cultural Marxists have embarked on the long march through all the other institutions in our country, the media, the universities, etc., they have gone after the churches and they have come into the SBC. And so over the last 10 years, we've been fighting battles to stop the Southern Baptist Convention from going theologically liberal, culturally liberal, or now, as we just say it, going woke. And so we have all the same issues from a Christian perspective, accepting radical gender ideology and Christian language, embracing DEI hiring practices at churches and seminaries in the SBC, saying things like critical race theory is an analytical tool that Christians can use instead of something to be rejected and fought against. And then the big one is women's ordination for the pastorate. This is something that is usually the first sign for any mainline Christian denomination that is going to go liberal, is they start allowing women pastors. And even the Catholic Church, they're holding the line on that strongly still, but the Southern Baptists have a big fight on it and a second vote on an amendment to stop it this June.
Talking with William Wolfe. William, people may not be aware of this. I am, because I went to seminary. I've seen how political these denominations can get. I remember watching the PCUSA, the Presbyterian Church of the USA, become entirely woke and liberal. And these, I want to say, leftists have engaged the political denominations. And when they do that, and especially when these denominations embrace kind of liberal thoughts and policies, they end up becoming smaller and smaller. People don't want to go to the churches anymore, and they eventually just kind of wither away and die. Help people understand, I think most people think, well, I'm just going to church. But no, there's actually major battles happening within these denominations over their, as you mentioned, their theology, political practices, political values, all that. Help people understand that this just isn't popping up now. This has been going on for decades and decades within these denominations.
Well, yeah, that's exactly right. It's really been a fight over the last, century or so as modernity has taken over the modern world. We had a form of theological liberalism called higher criticism come out of Germany and, work its way across Europe and into America that denied all the core tenets of the Christian faith. They said, well, we don't really know if Jesus rose from the dead, and we don't actually believe that he did these miracles, and you can't believe that the Bible is true, and that it's not the inerrant, inspired, authoritative, infallible word of God. It's just a tradition passed on by men, who knows who wrote this, that, or the other, but there's good stories here for living a moral life. And when you adopt that theological framework, that liberal framework of higher criticism, the Bible just becomes a feel-good story to be reshaped into any cause you could imagine it to be used for. And those are almost always progressive causes: mass immigration, socialism, the radical transgender ideology. And so not only does that hollow out the church, as one conservative commentator says, progressivism will hollow out your religion and wear it like a skin suit. It destroys the saving power of the gospel of Jesus Christ, but then it really takes the church and turns it into essentially just an organ of the progressive political party and the cultural revolution in our country. In Matthew 5, Jesus tells us to be salt and light. And when we do this, we lose both of those. That's
exactly right. William Wolfe, founder and executive director of the Center for Baptist Leadership. To give you a sense of how pervasive this is, Bill, yeah. I'm sitting in this seat because of this integration of progressive politics into seminaries. I I was on track to just become a pastor. I was very happy to just share the gospel, minister to people. I worked with an organization called Young Life. I went to Westmont College, got a degree in religious studies and philosophy. And then I went to Fuller Seminary. And I went to Fuller because some of my professors had gone there and my former pastor had gone to Fuller. And Fuller at one point was this kind of political break-off from the liberalization that was taking place at Princeton. Okay. So I go down to Fuller and I'm very happy. And I take an ethics class by the chair of the ethics department. And it is so progressive and so liberal. And it was like, Bill, you're not even in the same category this guy was in.
Wow.
Right? Like we read books about how it was the reason we have poverty is because of rich people. That the gospel goes hand in hand. It was this thing called liberation theology, right? If you know, Jesus would be a Marxist socialist type of stuff. And I'm sitting there in this class going, no, this is wrong. This is wrong. Not only biblically, it's wrong with, you know, economically, it's wrong on all this stuff. And so I started to debate this professor every single day in class. You're wrong. You know, and if you're going to debate your professor, you got to do your research. So I start reading, start listening to guys, conservative talk radio. I read a book by a guy named Hugh Hewitt, and then I become a full-blown conservative activist because this is active in churches. William Wolfe, founder and executive director of the Center for Baptist Leadership. What does your work look like within the SBC? You're trying to stop these denominations from becoming woke. Many of them have been captured. What do you have? What do you do kind of almost on a daily basis to try to prevent the SBC, the Southern Baptist Convention, from fully embracing woke ideas?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jeff. Thank you. So, you know, I believe in the value of institutions. We do live in an anti-institutional age, and I can understand that. I'm very sympathetic to the populist movement that's, you know, working its way out across America because our institutions have been corrupted and they can't be trusted. But the reality is conservatives and frankly, Christians and Catholics have built so many of the wonderful institutions in our country. And then the Marxists take them over. We pack up our bags and go home. We leave them buildings. We leave them endowments. And then we go start something newer and smaller and less impactful. And so our goal is to stop that from happening with the Southern Baptist Convention. We want to fight for the institution. We have 6 seminaries, the largest missionary sending agency in the world, and we do not want the left to get their hands on it and get control of it, and they are trying. They're coming after us. So in a practical level, we sort of have 2 horizons. One is the long-term work of institutional reform in the SBC, which will take many years, and that will be achieved through electing conservative presidents. The Southern Baptist Convention votes to elect a new president every year, and in this way, it's unlike many other major denominations, which are more hierarchical and top down, because the people in the Southern Baptist Convention actually get a say and get a vote. It's a very democratic religion. And so we are trying to make sure that conservative Southern Baptists wake up, not get woke, but wake up and come to our annual meeting in June this year to vote for a conservative president. And that's something we need to do year over year because that president appoints very key trustees to oversee all of our entities and organizations and other key appointments. So in that sense, it's kind of like a turn out the vote campaign for the Southern Baptist Convention. So if you're listening to this and you're a Southern Baptist, we need you in Indianapolis, June 11th to 12th of this year to take key votes. And then year over year, we're engaging in sort of issue-based campaigns as well. So right now there's this amendment that passed last year that needs to pass again this year. It's a constitutional amendment that has to pass 2 years to re-articulate our commitment to male-only pastors in the Southern Baptist Convention. So we're working on that. We're working on financial transparency. Many people might be amazed to hear this, but the Southern Baptist Convention actually has less financial transparency than Planned Parenthood. We're a charitable organization. All of our entities are charitable organizations, but we don't even provide the 990 level disclosure that non-exempt charitable organizations provide to the government. Now, we don't want the SBC to have to provide that to the government, but we want that financial accountability to the churches so people know how their tithe dollars are being spent. And we know from reporting done by people like Megan Basham and her upcoming book, Shepherds for Sale, that Southern Baptist tithe dollar money is being used to advance liberal causes. So we want financial transparency. And then at the Center for Baptist Leadership, just sort of the nuts and bolts of it is we'll be running articles that tackle these issues. We just launched a podcast where we're having, the top thinkers in Baptist life come on and educate people, get them informed, really aiming to equip institutional leaders, pastors, and engaged lay members to fight for the future of their denomination and the gospel witness of Southern Baptists.
William Wolfe's the founder and executive director of the Center for Baptist Leadership. William, people have criticized you as being a Christian nationalist and a threat to America. What's your response to those criticisms?
Well, my response to that is, that America had a Christian founding. I really like that language from Mark David Hall, a very respected historian. He says you can debate whether or not America was founded as a Christian nation per se, but he thinks the historical evidence shows that America had a Christian founding. And this is something that was widely accepted in America for hundreds of years. It's really only been in the last 70 years this has become under increasing attack. David Brewer, Supreme Court Justice, 1892 in the Church of the Holy Trinity versus the United States. He reviews, the consideration of what makes America, and he concludes after looking at all these things, our customs, our laws, our, the way we do life together. And he says, these and many other matters which might be noticed at a volume of unofficial declarations to the mass of organic utterances that this is a Christian nation. And so, my association with Christian nationalism is really nothing more than to help defend evangelical Americans and, patriotic Americans from this new slur by the left that attempts to make us sound extreme. And I just want to say, actually, guys, this is historical American political philosophy and an understanding of who we are as a nation. And you know what? It's not such a bad or scary thing.
Now, question for you on this one. What do you think the role then is for Christian nationalism? What is the goal you are looking for in promoting this?
Yeah, thank you. That is a great question. So there's actually a critic of Christian nationalism who gave a very good definition of it. And he sort of speaks to the goal in it. So this is from a guy, his name is Paul Miller, not a fan of Christian nationalism, but this is how he defines it. He says, Christian nationalism is the belief that there's something identifiable as an American nation distinct from other nations. So I'll pause right there. The first goal of Christian nationalism is to help ensure that America is not subsumed and taken over by the globalist blob. That's the nationalism part of it. We believe in sovereign nation states who get to self-determine their future and their path and not be influenced and overtaken by the WEF, the WHO, the UN, what have you. We want national sovereignty, strong borders, and the ability for a nation to determine its own course and future. So we're nationalist in that sense in a positive way. And then he says that American nationhood is and should remain defined by Christianity or Christian cultural norms, and that the American people and their government should actively work to defend, sustain, and cultivate America's Christian culture, heritage, and values. So that would be the other goal. So how does it look like for us to be rightly nationalistic in America? I would say it should be a Christian nationalistic sense when we're promoting Christian cultural heritage and values. And that's not at all what we're promoting today, because I believe that those Christian cultural heritage and values uphold strong families, uphold marriage, uphold the sanctity of life from the moment of fertilization until natural death. That's actually Catholic teaching, and I agree with it too. It's Catholic and historic Protestant teaching, but we've lost that one. And so that's really defend the American nation and keep us grounded in the Christian cultural heritage and values that's made us the freest country that I think the world has ever seen.
I appreciate the answer. Can you help me with your term of nation? Because nationalism derives from nation. How are you defining a nation?
Yeah, so I think that a nation is an entity that is self-governing and self-identified. It recognizes itself as being a distinct entity on the global playing stage. This is sort of a post-Westphalian view of nations, and so that you have borders, you have a people, you have governing documents, you have a political model that is agreed upon and adopted in that nation, and really, of course, in the democratic sense of the way, that the people have the right to determine the laws and the future of that land. And that, I think, stands quite in contradistinction to the open borders globalist view, which, I mean, this is so clearly articulated by the main WEF philosopher, Yuval Harari, who argues that in the future there will be no nation states. There will be, just one, global governing entity that will determine everything for everybody else. And I reject that entirely.
Interesting. I find it interesting you've kind of gone into the idea of the nation state, because I believe a nation can be something outside of politics and with those defined borders. I think you can do it with ethnicity, culture, a few other things. Could the Christian nationalism be achieved without taking control of the U.S. government, without having that idea of being in control of the nation state? Can you establish that sovereignty without the political power?
Well, when you say, take control of the U.S. government, I mean, I assume you just mean, use the avenues to achieve political and power in our country that's available to anybody out there, regardless of what they believe. Run in elections and become a president, exercise authority, elect good judges.
Well, I'm actually going one step further. I'm going to say that once you're a Christian and you're in charge, you then are bound to use your religious doctrine in order to shape the laws that you're going to put in front of the people. That's where I'm going with it.
Okay, well, I mean, I think to that question, do I think if a Christian has political authority in the United States of America, they should govern as a Christian? To that, I would say absolutely, because the reality right now is whether you're a Christian or an atheist or a Catholic or some radical progressive Marxist, everybody uses whatever authority they have in accordance to their worldview and their essentially religious belief system, whether they call it that or not. I mean, that is exactly what's happening right now. Look at any number one of these radical justices or judges enacting lawfare against Donald Trump. They're not doing it according to the Constitution. They're doing it according to their personal beliefs that are informed by a deeply religious view, again, whether they recognize it or not. My point there is all law, and this goes back to Aquinas, one of the key philosophers of the Catholic Church, and even further all the way back to Augustine. All law is essentially a governing religious enactment. There's no such thing as moral free or value free governing. So yes, I think a Christian should govern according to their religious beliefs, because that's what everybody does.
Now, do you see how there could be a problem with that, given that the person that is elected as a Christian also has to represent people that are non-Christians, whether they be agnostic, atheist, Jewish, Islam, Hindu, and the idea of the person, since they've been elected, say, well, now I am going to make the rules that are governing our society based on what my book says. Isn't that a problem given how America was set up?
Well, no, actually, I don't think it is, because again, let's just and that's pretty vague. So let me just try to assume a couple things and then answer it. First of all, what are some of the things that the Christian book says? Well, it says first and foremost that there is a God, and so I absolutely want everybody, every Christian who's been duly elected to exercise any degree of political authority to recognize that there is a God over the government, because if there is no God over the government becomes God. And so I actually think that when Christians are in political authority, they're going to be much more bounded than, these unbounded atheists who believe that humanity is just materialism and can be reshaped according to whatever philosophy or whim is coming down the track at that time of the day or culture or what have you. And so, and then again, it's just, I absolutely think that Christians, if they're elected into positions of power, whether it's in the United States or anywhere else, they should rule according to the laws of the land. Of course, again, Augustine said an unjust law is no law at all. And that was also rearticulated by MLK. So I think that you have to recognize sometimes there are laws that are unjust and you should work to change those. But I'm certainly not advocating, for revolution or ignoring or trampling the Constitution. In fact, I would argue as Christianity has become less prevalent in America, the Constitution gets trampled more and more and more. We respected our Constitution, our representative government in the United States, when we had more Christians, ruling and exercising political power than we do today.
Yeah and no. I mean, I could push on that a little bit, but I'm not sure that the argument's necessarily fair, nor is my analogy. So that's. I appreciate your example about using the Christian using their faith to guide their choices, but could we make the same argument with someone that is Muslim, that they then could look to the Quran and say this is the guiding principles, and they could honestly disagree with some of the conclusions come to by you, myself, and Jeff based on our shared faith, based on things like life, how to treat your spouse, how to treat your kids. But their faith tells them and instructs them to do something different. And that's the linchpin and the issue that I have just with the terminology and the idea of Christian nationalism, that because we are of faith, we then need to use all the guiding principles of our faith to enact the laws, because we are not ruling over Christians. If we wanted to have a Christian nation, we could do that. But it doesn't necessarily mean sovereignty like you described it based on borders in a political system. It can be something else. It can be the church. The church together is a nation. There is a nation of Catholicism. There's a nation of baptism. There's a nation of Lutheranism, because it would be defined that way based on their shared cultures and experiences. And they also are self-selected.
Yeah. So, I mean, that second point there, though, that just isn't how things are working out currently. There is, the Catholic Church might be one of the more distinct examples of what you're speaking to, but actually, I reject, a lot of Catholic doctrine that's referred to as integralism, and Catholics historically actually viewed their religious seat of power, the Pope, I mean, especially during the Holy Roman Empire, as being above the civil rulers of the day. And as a Protestant Christian, I reject that. I think that Scripture teaches that God has given a certain authority and jurisdiction to civil governors, and he's given a certain authority and jurisdiction to the church. And yes, the Bible does use language like the church is a holy nation. And so if you're using nation like that to describe a certain group of people with a shared identity, I don't discount that. I'd grant that happily, but that's not how we deal with nations as a political entity in the global playing stage today. And so so when I'm talking about nations, I am talking about sovereign political entities that have the right to police their borders. I mean, the Catholic Church, the Protestant denomination, they don't have any right to police the borders of any land anywhere, except, well, the Catholics do with the Vatican, right? That's again an exception. So I'm not an integralist. So I would actually reject sort of the fusing of church and state in one ecclesiastical and civil body. That's actually much more akin to Catholic teaching, and that's actually one of the critiques that I usually get on Christian nationalism. People want to call me a neo-integralist, and I actually totally reject that framework. But on your second question there, Bill, because it's important in terms of, can a Hindu rule according to his faith or a Muslim rule according to his faith? Well, absolutely. I actually assume they would. And you bring up Muslims, and that's probably one of the easiest ones to answer, is that the teachings of Islam and Quran are actually highly incompatible with the American political system, which again, I say, and I think is historically accurate. The American political system is deeply informed by Christianity. And this has been a concern by many people throughout American history, is that they have an allegiance to Allah, and they have a view of governing. I actually believe Islam is much more of sort of a theocratic fascist political system more than it is sort of just a standard religion. It's a conquering religion. And so, I would expect that Muslims would rule according to their faith, but I would just politely suggest that is actually, that is quite incongruent with the American political system. And if for some reason we had all of a sudden majority Muslim rule, in Congress in America, or in state governors or state houses, that America would be reshaped, into something that would be essentially unrecognizable as America as we know and love it.
Oh, absolutely. I 110% agree. And that's why, and you're absolutely accurate in why I used the Islamic example. One, because it's very easy to understand, but also I agree with you that it is incongruent with many of the functions of American democracy. And that's why I used it as a point, because I feel that if someone that is Islamic is elected to public office, if they are putting the Quran in front of the Constitution, we have an issue that we need to honor the people you are serving as a whole. all of the various ethnicities and all the various religions. And that's my pushback with the idea of, just like you talked about the intersection, of bringing the church and the state together. And that's where I push back on the idea of Christian nationalism. I want to turn a little bit and talk about religious tests. Should there be, and what do you think about religious tests for someone who is running for office?
Yeah. Okay. So again, I just want to be very clear that William Wolfe personally does not support or advance the idea of merging state and church power together. I think they should be separate, but I also think we should understand what separation of church and state really means. It's actually not in our Constitution. It's from Thomas Jefferson in a letter to who? To Baptists, actually, the Danbury Baptists. But in terms of religious tests for office, I mean, I think that that's something that, you know, people have the right to determine for themselves. We used to have, you know, people who advocated for religious tests of office. Isaac Backus was a Baptist who argued that only Christians should be able to assume public office in America. John Locke, who himself is certainly no advocate of what we understand to be Christian nationalism. He was, you know, an Enlightenment figure. He argued that atheists weren't fit to hold public office. And so my point on that, my take on that is really that would be a sort of particular prudential application for a people that they could make for themselves if they wanted to. But I don't see that being something that is, you know, that is currently in any way, shape, or form at play in the American context today. That's certainly not something I'm going around advocating for or trying to advance.
William Wolfe, founder and executive director of the Center for Baptist Leadership here on the Jeff and Bill Show. Tell you what, I think we could, you and I, Mr. Wolfe, we could actually advocate for a religious test for office. But hear me out. This is what we do, okay? We make it a religious test for office, but we turn it into a game show. We choose a host, we put it in prime time, and if you say that you are Islamic, then we have the Islamic Jeopardy. And you go ahead and you're running for office, and then we see how much you know. And then we have the Christian Jeopardy, and we do every different night. We could do a different religion, and then based on your winnings and your prize total, you get enough money, you can add it to your campaign. And if you end up being busted, then you got to not run for office. I think if we make it into entertainment, maybe we'd get something there. But that's just me and my weird ideas. But thanks for the conversation. This has been really fun.
This has been great, guys. William Wolfe, founder and executive director of the Center for Baptist Leadership. Their mission is to revitalize the Southern Baptist Convention by cultivating courageous and uncompromising Baptist leadership for the 21st century. Bottom line, getting the wokeness out of the church. You can go to centerforbaptistleadership.org. That's centerforbaptistleadership.org to learn more about their organization, or you can follow William Wolfe on Twitter. He's got a big following there. William_E_Wolfe with an E.
Check him out
there, and follow what he's posting over there. William, thanks so much for the conversation. Thanks for being on the Jeff and Bill Show.
Absolutely, guys. Thanks for having me. And if you're a Baptist, I hope to see you in Indianapolis, June 11 to 12.
That's awesome.
Jeff and Bill, weekday mornings from 6 to 10 on News Talk 710 KNUS.